Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. Episode 37 is all about coffee. We are lucky enough to have three of the nation's foremost coffee experts based right here in Portland, so I dragged them all into the studio at OPB to talk about third wave coffee, microroasters, and coffee in cans. In the studios of OPB today, I am joined by this dream team of experts who have been covering the international and national coffee scenes for years now. Connie Blumhardt is the publisher and founder of Roast Magazine and Daily Coffee News. Welcome, Connie.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
And Kenneth Olson is co-founder and publisher of Barista Magazine. Hello, Kenneth.
Hi.
And Jordan Michelman is a beverage journalist and the co-founder of the online coffee publication Sprudge. Hello, Jordan.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hello.
Great to have you all here. And now for our first course, Catch the Third Wave. Jordan Michelman, third wave coffee is one of those terms that I hear a lot in foodie circles, and I even use it, but I don't think I actually know what it means.
You're not alone.
So can you just define this term for us and tell us why we need to know it?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of somewhere between natural wine and farmhouse cheese in terms of an imperfect term that describes like a bigger trend or concept. To understand the third wave, you sort of have to think about why you would separate stuff out into waves in the first place. But it's kind of the same way of saying, like, there's been different eras of coffee or different, like, movements within trends in coffee. And so the biggest one is to kind of take it from thinking of coffee not just as fuel, but as something cultural. And that's kind of the shift from the first wave to the second wave. So people have been brewing coffee in America since before the Civil War. And it's this kind of long-running cultural thing, but very kind of thought of as utilitarian. Soldiers in the Civil War would get it as part of their rations. And what started to kind of happen more in the, let's loosely say, in the 50s or 60s, is it became part of this sort of countercultural thing. And you can think of the coffee company Peet's down in Berkeley as being one of the real kind of cradles for where that started, of coffee as being this wider cultural sort of experience, and as that sort of like spread out to the rest of the country. And that leads directly into Starbucks, and Starbucks teaching people about coffee coming from around the world in the 80s and 90s and all the rest of it. And third wave kicks in when you start to think of coffee as being something that's more like culinary, with the possibility of expressing not just different flavors from different countries, but subtle differences within those countries and regions for why coffee tastes the way it does. Not just for the terroir that it comes from, but what the processing decisions are made by the artisans who make that coffee, how that coffee is roasted again by like another set of artisans who actually get it to you to be able to drink. And so the term has roots. There's a guy named Tim Castle who claims to have invented it all the way back in 1999, but it sort of enters the popular industry lexicon in like 2002 in an article written by a woman named Trish Rothgeb. She was writing in a trade guild newsletter. From there, it sort of got mainstreamed into bigger publications, including NPR and the New York Times. It's probably best summarized by the author Jonathan Gold, who then was writing for the LA Weekly. Now he writes for the LA Times. But he described it as being where beans are sourced from farms instead of countries. Roasting is about bringing out rather than incinerating the unique character of each bean. And the flavor is clean and hard and pure.
Okay, so as a wine writer, I totally understand what you're saying. Okay, this is making sense to me. Ken, can you tell me what's the difference between specialty coffee and third wave coffee? Because I've heard that term specialty coffee as well.
Specialty coffee is a term to distinguish really good coffees from commodity coffee. Basically, in the coffee world, coffees are traded as commodities. The vast majority of coffee is traded like corn or soybeans or oil, where they're not looking for differentiation in the flavors or anything like that. It's all looked to be the same sort of what we think of as a stereotypical coffee. Specialty coffee is coffees that score above 85 points on a 100-point scale. So it's a very small percentage of coffees are considered specialty coffees. It's something less than, I think, 10% of all coffees produced. And those are the ones that traditionally are looked for as the third wave type coffees, because part of what Jordan is describing when he's telling that history of third wave coffee, one of the major things behind it is recognizing that not all coffees need to taste the same, that there are different flavor and characteristics in coffees that may be from the variety of the plant, from the terroir of the region where it's grown or the specific farm where it's grown, from the country where it's grown, where the processing takes place. So there are a lot of different steps in producing coffee that can affect the flavor. And the better the flavor and the higher the score, then it gets into specialty coffee where the farmer is most likely going to collect a higher payment for that coffee. And roastery here in the States or someplace outside typically of the growing regions is going to pay a real premium and market that coffee as specialty coffee.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this seems like you said it's a pretty small percentage of the coffee, but it seems
tiny
like
percent.
It seems like that's where all the action and excitement is.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fair to say. It's important to think about it when we talk about, or at least in my opinion, it being kind of an imperfect term. The waves metaphor sort of implies that like the wave crashes on a beach and then another one comes and replaces it. And that isn't really what's happened with coffee. There's still quite a bit of what you might popularly think of as like second wave coffee and indeed first wave coffee where it is sort of commodity and fuel coffee that's still consumed and loved and wildly popular and drunk all over the world happening now today. So the idea that third wave sort of crashed in and washed away all the rest of the stuff is not really how it's worked.
Right. Jordan is right. Like, you know, what we think of, if you ask people to name the most popular or famous coffee, right now it would probably come back Starbucks, which is traditionally what we would call a second wave coffee, but still Folger sells way more coffee than Starbucks still today. Like they're still a much bigger company and are buying much larger amounts of coffee.
I'm surprised people even still drink Folger.
Also, Starbucks would be outraged to be called second wave coffee.
Yes,
like
they
they don't think of themselves as that, and they've spent more money than the four of us will ever see in our lives to disprove that notion over the last 5 years.
Well, I think an interesting point from both Ken and Jordan is that truly only 10% of coffee is considered specialty. All the rest of the coffee, 90% of the coffee that's produced is not specialty in the world. So there's a lot more coffee that is being consumed that's not specialty than is specialty.
Yeah.
Even though the specialty third wave gets lots of excitement and interest from the media and consumer world.
Okay, so like when McDonald's started making lattes, what was that? Was that first wave or was it second wave? Because it was kind of like elevating it from just coffee to, you know, kind of yummy coffee or coffee that was a little more upscale?
That's a good question. I guess maybe the lines are blurred a little bit because the drink menu that they rolled out at McDonald's was pretty similar to what you would see walking into a third wave cafe. And indeed, there are parts of the world where McDonald's operates like standalone high-end McCafe, just kind of coffee entities. In Australia, this is a big part of their brand, and it's wildly popular down there to like go and get a flat white or whatever from the McCafe. That's like they've had a lot of success there with that culturally. So that's maybe an example where some of the lines are kind of blurred a little bit, and it's not totally clear the role that like fitting fast wave fitting fast food into third wave. This is something that different people have sort of taken swings at, and it's part of the game that Starbucks is playing too. So there's not a clean, perfect answer, and this is a great thing to like mention back to like natural wine. Like there's not a clean answer for what it is or isn't, or who's doing it or who's not doing it. You know, like it's kind of a judgment call, and sometimes people will feel judged for it.
I do think Jordan should trademark fast wave. I like that. That's
wave.
pretty good.
Well, I do have to say, having enjoyed all of your publications, that I think there's also just a culture and an aesthetic to third wave coffee. I mean, there's the whole barista culture. There's a look to a really good specialty coffee shop.
Absolutely. I would think a distinguishing characteristic to know that you're in a third wave location would be a knowledgeable barista that can tell you in depth about the coffee that they're serving and why they're serving it or preparing it in the way that they do. So I wouldn't expect if you're going to a McCafe or one of the fast casual places that are moving in to do more coffee, that person serving your coffee is going to be able to tell you why that coffee is special, why they prepared it in a certain way for you, or why they would recommend it over a different coffee on their menu for your particular likes or tastes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the barista is kind of like a sommelier, and
there's that role, yeah.
You run Barista Magazine, so I'll just keep asking you about this subject. So it seems also that the baristas are starting to become kind of celebrities within the coffee world, kind of like the master sommeliers are celebrities within the wine world. Is that right?
There's a certain truth to that. There are competitions and different ways that coffee professionals are recognized globally as being the best in their field and are respected or treated in some ways like celebrities. Yeah, for sure. And primarily what they're doing is approaching coffee as providing an experience, connecting a consumer through what we would call the seed to cup chain, which is all the people who are producing that coffee. It goes through a lot of hands before it reaches the consumer, and tying that all together and being able to provide the story of that coffee to the consumer. That's another important fact. And specialty coffee or third wave coffee is being able to tell somebody specifically about the coffee that they are having or that you're serving to that person in depth. Whereas on the commodity side, you would never be able to provide that kind of information because the commodity coffees are all blended together and you don't have the traceability.
Okay. So, Connie, for those of us who haven't been studying coffee, can you give us like a quick lowdown, by region or nation? What's the difference maybe in acidity or flavor? If I don't know if I like South American or African or Indonesian coffee, are there some basic rules of thumb?
Yes and no. I mean, 10 years ago you could say, oh, a Central American tastes like this. You could say an African coffee tastes like this. But over the past 10, 20 years, all of the processing, not all of the processing, but a lot of the processing, the way that they process coffee has changed. So they are trying different methods in Africa than they used to, have 10 or 20 years ago. Or they're trying different methods in Central America that they never used there. And sometimes they're even developing new methods of processing. So for me, I think it's hard. I mean, I don't cup coffee every single day, so it's hard for me to give you an exact answer. I mean, I can give you some general ideas, but I think it's a pretty hard question to answer.
It's a super hard question to answer.
The maybe comparison there is sort of saying, like, do you like French wine or Italian wine? And it's like, well, do you like Beaujolais or do you like Bordeaux or do you like, weird white wine from the Loire or what? Like, there's so much variation within a country. And this is something that as there's been a deeper understanding of the degree of control and artistry that coffee producers put into getting the coffee so that it can be, shipped and roasted in the first place, that those choices that those people make in El Salvador or Kenya or wherever else, that dramatically impacts what you taste in the cup. And there's not an all-encompassing, there's nothing even like a DOC system where you like have to comport to standards for it to be like met to a thing for export. Like, there's nothing like that. It's really up to the individual people. Some of it gets done in bulk. Some of it gets done so crazy experimentally that like they don't necessarily even know what it's going to taste like at the end. Like, there's a ton of variation.
Like, maybe we should say what processing means when we're talking about coffee, because it sounds like a intimidating or a industrial process, but it's one of the major ways that flavor is given to the coffee, because coffee is a bush or a tree. We call that coffee. We also call coffee the cherry that grows on it. It's the fruit of that tree. But what we are really interested in to brew coffee or to make coffee is the seed inside of that cherry. So processing is how do you get to that seed inside of the cherry. So there's the cherry fruit, there's a mucilage inside of there, and it's processing is removing all that stuff eventually to get to the little seed inside of it. And how you get that fruit away from the seed will affect the flavor of that seed. So the primary ways that coffee is processed worldwide is either a washed or a natural. And washed means you're using water and machine to remove that cherry from the seed. And a natural process would mean that you were drying that cherry on the seed and it's removed at a later time. And drying the cherry on the seed in a natural process is a way to get super fruity, fragrant coffees. And that typically only used to happen in Ethiopia and a couple of other locations. That's one of the major ways that coffee has changed in the last decade, maybe. Because now you'll get Brazil has a huge natural coffee production now. A lot of other regions are looking for natural processed. And then it also works the other way. Back in Ethiopia, there's more washed process now than there used to be. Because each time you do the different process, it really affects the flavor in the end. So there's a lot of experimentation right now on the producing end of trying these different what we call processing methods to try to increase the flavor or create a different flavor profile for coffees.
And then the coffee comes over to the U.S.
Yes.
And most of us who like coffee but don't know a lot about it, at least we know whether we like light roast, medium roast, or dark roast. And that brings us to our next topic, which is, it seems hand in hand with this third wave movement. We've also got the micro roaster or nano roaster movement. So I'm going to toss this one to Connie to start us out. What is a micro roaster or a nano roaster?
Well, it's a little bit of a touchy answer because there really isn't a straight industry-defined definition of a micro roaster. And I kind of look at two basic definitions. And one would be a company that roasts anywhere from 1 to 60 pounds of coffee per batch. And then another definition that's kind of an evolved definition, in my opinion, is a company that is roasting high-quality coffee to specific standards in small batches. And they sound kind of similar, I think, in definition, but it's muddled by exactly how much coffee you can roast and still call yourself a micro roaster. So around the same time, the third wave terminology kind of started. The micro roaster terminology also started. And I think it was probably in the late 90s that people started using this term. And the controversy in terms of how to define it comes from the term microroaster because of the companies that pioneered the category name microroaster no longer truly fit in that category because they roast so much coffee. But of course, everybody still wants to be called a microroaster because it has such great connotations to being a specialty. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think a newer term that was coined from Nick Cho from Wrecking Ball Coffee in San Francisco is a nano roaster. I believe he was the one who first used that terminology. I like it. Which kind of takes the place, I think, of the former micro roaster and creates a new category of truly small roasters and kind of sets it apart from the micro roasting community. You know,
those are the little guys when you go to the coffee shop and you actually see the guy in the back and he's roasting. Like, that's a nano roaster. Is that a good sort of general?
I think that's a good general. I mean, it's hard because, you know, there isn't an industry, you know, our industry association hasn't, you know, defined these terms. So we kind of make them up as we go. So I think, you know, somebody who owns 1 or 2 cafes, roasts their own coffee, they're probably a nano roaster. But once you start going up 3, 4, 5 cafes, you can be roasting quite a bit of coffee a year. And I would think then you're definitely a micro roaster. You're not just roasting for your shop or 1 or 2 shops. You're roasting for your shop and wholesale accounts. You know, it's really easy to see those kind of nano roasters and micro roasters in Portland because we have so many examples here.
Mm-hmm. And Roast Magazine does awards every year, right, for the best micro roaster? I mean, what's your criteria for that? So
we started the awards in 2004, which our industry has completely changed, right? When we were talking about micro roasters back then, they truly were people who were just roasting for 1 or 2 shops, and that was it. So we have a competition. We award 2 prizes, one to a micro category and one to a macro category. And a long time ago, we just had to make a call about how many pounds, what was the cutoff in our mind, which made you a small roaster and a big roaster. And so we chose 100,000 pounds. So a micro roaster, in the definition for the competition, is someone who roasts under 100,000 pounds of coffee a year, and a macro roaster is someone who roasts over 100,000 pounds a year.
I have no idea what that would translate into.
Well, we could probably do some quick math, but someone who's roasting 100,000 pounds a year, they probably have one or two stores, some wholesale accounts. They're still pretty small, in my opinion.
Oh, interesting.
But once you in my mind, once you cross that threshold of 100,000 pounds, you should be turning over enough coffee where you might be making enough money where you can really start to grow your business. And that's where I've seen a lot of coffee roasters hit that mark and then just, they've expanded in much quicker time than they were before.
So where's all the excitement in nano roasting and micro roasting right now? Are there parts of the world where roasting is more interesting, trends that we should be watching?
Well, one of the things I had the thought of when you were saying, is nano roasting means somebody is going to be in their cafe roasting. I think maybe even 5 years ago, that's probably what that meant. But there's been this big trend that's happened, and there's a facility out in New York that was sort of the tip of the spear for it called the Pulley Collective. But we have one here now in Portland called the Buckman Coffee Factory, and it's this idea of collaborative roasting spaces where there's all the equipment you could ever need, and even things like green storage and training and things available. But people can rent time throughout, like a calendar throughout the month, so that you don't have to own all your own equipment or do that roasting in your space to be able to be your own roaster. And this has had a huge effect. I feel like Portland, we've really seen it happen very dramatically in terms of like cafes being what we would call wholesale customers of bigger roaster companies to now many of the small, even tiny single owner operated cafes are also roasters now in 2018. And the co-roasting, that phenomenon of co-roasting, that business model has really made that possible, financially possible. And there's some cool benefits that brands have for being able to do that. You have the pride of being able to say that you roasted the coffee that you're serving, which I think is cool for entrepreneurs. You get to do your own packaging for it, which is cool for entrepreneurs, and they get to work with artists they like, or maybe they're artists themselves and they can have that. And there's some like cost margin stuff that is offered to them versus buying roasted from like the bigger roaster companies. The trade-off can be is that sometimes those bigger roaster companies are bigger roaster companies because they're really good at roasting coffee and like really good at sourcing coffee and have a lot of expertise. And the little folks who are maybe just renting an hour or two a week or whatever at the roaster so that they can have enough to like have their cafe in it, they can sometimes be limited just by like that 1,000 hours thing, right? They have, or the 10,000 hours thing. Like they haven't spent as much time doing it as some of the other things. So maybe the product isn't always as good or whatever. But that's been an interesting trend to watch. And Portland has been like a total battleground for it over the last 5 years. And just as a coffee drinker in cafes, it's something that like I feel like I'm always kind of looking for and watching, like going into different places and being like, that used to be a multi-roaster, and now they just serve themselves. Isn't that
Jordan,
interesting?
Once again, I want to say this. You could just substitute the word wine and winemaker in.
Yeah.
As you know, we have all these shared winemaking spaces now, especially in Portland, and this is where the small winemakers get their start nowadays. I love it. I love that across these craft beverage cultures, we have the same sort of business models popping up. Oh, that's so interesting.
And the same fights and arguments and stuff, too. I mean, to Connie's point about people trying to figure out what's a nano roaster, what's a micro roaster, the big analogy there is in beer. Like, there's this war happening in beer right now for what is craft beer, who gets to call themselves craft beer. And, like, if you're conglomerately owned by AB InBev, can you still call yourself craft beer? If a week ago you weren't owned by that conglomerate and now you are, do you no longer get to call yourself that? Like, and the beer people are, and when I say a war, I mean I mean at times like real physical violence, like fighting it out for like who is or isn't for this linguistic thing. I don't think we're quite that bad in coffee, but
not yet, but it's on the horizon for sure. Yeah. I've heard a lot more conversation about how can you still call yourself a micro roaster when you're roasting, millions of pounds of coffee a year.
Well, I want to get back to the cultural aspect. Maybe this somewhat relates to the fighting over who's legit and who's sticking it to the man and who isn't. I feel like for a while the stars of coffee were the importers who were out in the field, and you'd see pictures of them in the jungle, sourcing the coffee. But are the roasters now becoming more of the stars, or
the individuals working in coffee? But I think the answer to your question, who are the stars in coffee right now, is coffee. Mm-hmm. Like particularly what we would say would be geisha, which is a variety of coffee. It's a very finicky variety that produces a very unusual, distinctive cup profile. And it's particularly in your listeners may be surprised here, we have barista competitions. They happen in the States and around the world. We just had the World Championship for that in Seoul, Korea in November. In the final round, 5 of the 6 competitors were using a geisha. The person who ended up winning was actually the one competitor who didn't use a geisha, which is interesting in itself for our readership at least. But geisha was a very unknown variety as recently as 10 years ago, and it's the variety that sets it really came out of Panama, and it's been setting the insanely high records for green coffee. It's like $500 a pound or something crazy for green coffee. That's part of that, I think, is just to produce headlines for the story. But it's also that people, especially coffee people, really like the flavor profile that's in geisha.
And can you spell that?
Depends on G. And our style guide says Gesha, but it could be Geisha. It depends. It's not so much the Japanese geisha. It's a Ethiopian community called Gesha.
Okay.
But it varies. You'll see it spelled both directions depending on the publication. But the point being that one of the trends we're seeing and have seen here in specialty coffee specifically, and there are a number of reasons for this, but is looking for more varieties than just what we would consider Arabica, which is what primarily we're drinking coffee around the world, especially specialty coffee. It's all Arabica.
Okay, so it's not just the location of the farm. It's not just how the bean is processed. It's also the variety of the bean itself. And
Absolutely.
Then here in the States, it's the roaster and how they're roasting.
Can be.
So many different factors.
And how it's prepared.
How it's prepared.
Yeah, there are,
we haven't even talked about pour over versus
as
espresso.
I say, the thing with coffee is there are many steps along the way, and each step can make it worse. It's hard to ever improve it on each step. So like everybody can take away from the quality of the coffee that you're going to get eventually. It's hard to add something back into that.
Well, to go back to the collective, like Jordan was talking about, the company here in Portland is called the Buckman Coffee Factory, and they have a competition in the fall every year where they take, I think this year they had 40 entries. They had 40 roasters who entered, and they all got 25 pounds of the exact same green coffee. And it was crazy how different they all tasted. I mean, it kind of blew my mind that there were so many different variations of just roasting that went into this green coffee that was exactly the same when everyone started.
There's a never-ending list of possible little variables that will dramatically affect what happens. I've been to cuppings before that were 25 different expressions of coffee from the same farm.
Wow. And we should say cuppings are professional tastings.
Yeah, for sure. It's sort of the industry standard, which has had some life now out into the wild as like a wider way of like formally being able to evaluate coffee. You can think of it as being the same as like a wine tasting where you sort of swirl around and spit. You don't drink all of it. It's kind of similar to that. There's a little bit more steps along the way for coffee stuff because coffee always has to be more complicated than it seems. But yeah, there can be just as much crazy variation within like one producer, one farm. Yeah, it's like a bottomless pit of like little variables that change what happens at the end.
Well, speaking of tasting coffee, I have been salivating the whole time we've been talking. I just am dying to taste some coffee. And Connie, you brought a very cool looking coffee maker.
I did make some coffee, and just a little nod to another Portland-based company. This is the Ratio Coffee Brewer that is distributed by Clive Coffee. It came out in the market 3 years ago, I think. It's what I use every day. I like the maker a lot. And the coffee that I brewed is from Spy House Coffee Roasters out of Minnesota. And this is a coffee from Mexico. It is Celia Leticia Sosa Cortez. It is a Cup of Excellence winner, which is, the Cup of Excellence is basically an auction for coffee. So they specialize in going into different countries, and they have all the farmers enter a competition, and the coffees are ranked and cupped, and they have a winner, and then they have buyers from around the world buy this coffee. So
Cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's taste some. And I brought some coffees for our next segment. We are going to be talking about coffee in cans. So I have one little short stubby can of Blue Bottle coffee. And a regular sized, like soda can, beer can sized can of Stumptown Nitro cold brew coffee. So I'll pour some of that while Connie's pouring her delicious coffee, and we can all taste.
Oh, thank you, Ken.
Sure. One of the things that's cool about the Spy House coffee, and that hopefully your listeners can go to their local coffee shops and find things like this, is that coffee actually came with the second coffee from the same farm that was processed differently. So this is a more common thing that we're seeing more roasters and cafes present, is the same coffee processed differently. So what we were talking about before, so you might be the same coffee processed naturally and washed. You'd be naturally processed and semi-washed, just to develop and show off different flavors that you get from the same exact coffee, just if you change the processing.
The tasty notes on the package include bergamot, shortbread, and Malbec. So this was a sample sent to us, and I have to say, I think it was probably sent to Ken too,
Yes.
because he knew that it was packaged very beautifully.
Oh.
I mean, it's stunning package, beautiful craft box, embossed with gold lettering, really, really fancy. And I would guess it was. Do you know how much?
I believe it's $40 for the
one,
two.
For the two.
For the package. But
So how much is that
I'm
a
not
pound?
sure.
Well, this is
That's
8
12
ounces.
ounces, 8 ounces.
So
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
it'd be
So we're
$40
getting
a pound.
kind of in the realm of specialty teas, where some of those specialty teas can be quite expensive. So I didn't realize coffee beans were
Oh, absolutely.
getting up there as well.
Yes.
yeah, and I think the one thing with tea is you can stretch out, a canister of tea much longer, than you can, an 8-ounce bag of coffee might last us, 3 days.
Yeah.
Also, the volume of tea is much lighter, so you can airship tea for much less money. You can get tea from tea gardens in Taiwan or China over to America for considerably less money, and it comes ready. You don't do the roasting here in America for it the same way you do with green coffee. So everything about the coffee shipping and exporting and importing compared to tea is way more expensive.
Okay, so I'll think twice before I buy really expensive tea next time.
No, you
Well,
should.
no,
you
you-
should buy
yeah,
really
yeah.
expensive.
Oh, I should
Yeah,
buy.
yeah.
Okay.
But tea's shelf life is longer than coffee as well. Once coffee's been roasted, it starts degrading.
Well, I have to say this is delicious, and I will shock you all. I'm sorry, but I do put cream and sugar in my coffee typically. I'm a total cretin, but this I can easily drink straight. It's so smooth. It's so flavorful. And is there something special about the machine you brought, Connie? Or
Well, I'm no engineer, and coffee brewers kind of work the same way. But this machine was actually designed to brew more like a pour-over machine versus a traditional coffee brewer, and I think that the taste profile definitely lends itself to the fact that it does taste more like a pour-over versus a brewed.
well, let's move to our next topic, which is coffee in a can. We do have a couple that we're tasting right now, this Blue Bottle coffee and the Stumptown Nitro. Ken, I'm wondering if you can tell me anything about coffee in cans, and also your magazine, your Barista magazine. So is the barista community kind of ticked off about coffee in cans, or is it not threatening the business?
I don't believe, I can't speak for everybody in the community, I don't believe people are upset with coffee in cans. There are people who don't like cold brew coffee, as a rule. And those people probably are no more fans of coffee in cans than they are of cold brew generally. This is the reason. I do like cold brew coffee, but not everybody does, because if you're not brewing coffee at a hot temperature, what we were just talking about with that pre-infusion that's releasing those volatile chemicals, that's really giving you that great aroma, that is happening in part because of the heat interacting with the ground coffee. You don't get that if you're cold brewing. You're going to get a very low acidity in your coffee if you're using cold brew, so that's going to affect your flavor. You're going to get the main criticism of it would be that the flavor is not what it could be. There's not a lot of great aromatics. There's not any acidity. So the floral tastes that are described on the packaging, for example, for this coffee, you're probably not going to get that if you had brewed that as a toddy or a cold brew. So it's a different experience than what you're going to get drinking hot coffee. The packaged cold brew products are what we would call a RTD, a ready-to-drink product. I don't know that certainly cafe owners aren't against them because they're hugely profitable. Mm-hmm. They're very popular and they're easy to buy and take with you. And maybe you have a display with those when people are at the counter ordering their coffee to be created in the cafe, but you know that 4 hours later when they're at work, they're going to want a coffee too, and they might just take a can or a carton of the cold brew with them to do later in the day. So one of the things that's different with cold brew too is the types of coffees typically used to produce a cold brew, because we're not going to get those great floral notes. We're not going to get a lot of acidity. You're not going to use a coffee to create a cold brew that has a lot of that in it. So you might be able to get away with using a slightly lower scoring coffee. Because one thing that cold brew does require is a lot of coffee. Like your small can from Blue Bottle there, in that amount, they probably used as much coffee as they would to brew a 12-ounce cup. But it's, I think that's a 6-ounce can. So it's nearly twice as much, or it can be easily twice as much ground coffee or roasted coffee to produce the same amount. That's why they often will be like, add milk, add water this down. This is a concentrate. But one of the things that I think is important to remember, and so I think like our readers recognize and they don't get angry or disappointed over these products, is those coffee growers that we love and celebrate that are producing amazing 90-point plus coffees. Like we said before, specialty coffee is 10% of all the coffees produced in the world. Even for a very high quality producing coffee grower, they may be producing, exceptional coffees, but that's still only going to be part of the coffee they're producing. They're also going to produce coffees that score, they might score 90. They might have others that score 84. They might have a lot of coffees that score under that, and so they're not even getting the specialty benefit of a higher scoring coffee. But growing coffee is a really hard job, and all that coffee that they grow, they want to be able to sell, even if they can't sell it for the best price possible. A growing segment like cold brew that might be able to use lower scoring coffees means that they may be able to sell more coffee to the partners that they're already working with in the roastery, and it every coffee will find a home. Right now in the world, every coffee is used for something, and this is just other ways to find homes for those coffees that the farmer is producing.
Well, I definitely get what you're saying about the aromatics, having this delicious hot cup.
For sure.
Sticking my nose in, there's just so much going on. And then these, of course, we're drinking the cold out of plastic cups, but the flavors are just kind of flat, aren't they? How would you all describe the flavor profile of a cold brew coffee?
I think they would hope you call it smooth as opposed to flat. But it's going to be a lot less floral. I certainly think you can tell a difference between the Blue Bottle we're drinking is not carbonated in any way. The Stumptown cold brew we're drinking has nitro in it, so you can taste those tiny little bubbles in there.
I mean, I can see the foam, but I'm not actually I was kind of hoping I would get like a truly carbonated experience. I don't even think I'm getting that.
I don't think they're going for a truly carbonated experience. What they're trying to do, I believe, is it makes it a little sweeter. The tiny bubbles produce more surface area so that you have more flavor receptor in your mouth when you're drinking that. And if you would have popped that can open and poured it straight into a nice glass with the nitro, you should get an effect like if you had poured a Guinness in there, and you'll get the cascading look down the side of the glass of the tiny bubbles falling down. It's visually, should be a fairly nice thing to look at.
Jordan's making a face.
Yeah.
Are you not a fan, Jordan?
No, I'm not a fan. Cold brew's cool. There's a good quote. I saw somebody share about this when we were talking about the waves before. And to Ken's point of saying that there's some people who are sort of against it, there's a sort of dagger phrase I'd seen shared around that cold brew coffee is second wave wolf in third wave sheep's clothing. And
My goodness.
This can sort of show you like people are fighting about this stuff in coffee too. I am probably not. I'm not a great cold brew drinker in my own life or for like my own volition as a drinker. I did a cold brew taste test with the Willamette Week back for their coffee issue back in like November.
This is the weekly news magazine in Portland.
Yeah, that's right. And we drank through like 30 different cold brews and tried them all and made flavor notes. And the one thing that we kept talking about, that smoothness thing, which you were like, oh, it tastes kind of flat. The word that we had for it was a flubber.
Yes.
That like that sort of, even though it's a nonsense word, expresses that palate experience of it, that there is that like, there can be that flubbery texture. But, cold brew is also really popular. It's good for business. It's hard to be too mad at it.
Listen how excited you are, Jordan.
It serves a purpose, and Ken, your point is absolutely right to say that, like, and it's that same thing we were talking about of saying, like, the waves don't exclude each other. Well, like, specialty coffee doesn't exclude the existence and the reality of all of the rest of the coffee in the world. And Ken's right. There's many producers, in fact, nearly every producer will have a portion or some of what they do for that they grow that isn't going to taste like how this lovely Spy House coffee that Connie brewed for us tastes. And that's okay. And there's sort of a place for that to go. And it's also, cold brew has been the key and the lock for a lot of coffee brands to expand and grow their footprint and grow where they're being sold, where they're being drunk. And as somebody with like a vested interest in the continued growth and success of the coffee industry, it's hard to be too mad at that.
All right, Connie, so if you had a choice, would you order an iced coffee that had been brewed hot and then iced, or would you just grab a cold brew? What do you prefer?
I wouldn't order either. I'm actually in Jordan's camp. I appreciate, I actually, my coffee preference is just straight brewed coffee, nothing added in it, of course. And the cold brew, I appreciate the beverage and I like the taste of it, but it's not something that I would go to naturally. But I do think, as Jordan said, it's offered a really kind of exciting, I'm not going to say fad or I don't know, maybe it appears that it's a new segment that's not going anywhere, so we can't really call it a fad anymore. But it definitely has provided another outlet and another way for the media to talk about coffee, and that's great for our industry.
That's an excellent point. And we're getting closer, Connie, as you will know, every year once it gets to be like the end of March or April, every mainstream media publication in America will write their like gee whiz cold brew story. Like it'll be like every places that maybe do one coffee story a year will do their cold brew story every year. And I can't wait to start getting pitched stories about, hey, have you heard about how great cold brew is from freelancers? Because that will definitely happen.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up our coffee hour here. And what's really good with coffee is dessert. So it's time for our dessert course, where we each go around and just share something we've been enjoying this week. I will go first. as a wine writer, I often am sent free samples. Like you were saying, you're often sent free samples of coffee beans. And I got a really unusual one recently, and I think it would be very helpful for coffee writers as well. Apparently, the new thing in teeth whitening is charcoal. Have you heard about this? And so this company called Tuxedo sent me this Tuxedo all-natural and organic teeth whitener and detoxifier. And it's like powdered charcoal with baking soda and lemon oil. It's so strange. So you're supposed to brush your teeth with it, and then it turns your toothbrush black. And then your teeth are black. And then you brush your teeth again, and then supposedly over time, all those wine stains in my case, or coffee stains in your guys' case, are gone. But my problem is then your sink is covered with all this black stuff. And so I read somewhere to brush your teeth with this in the shower, which is even more confusing because then you get all this black stuff in your grout. So anyway, I'll be interested to see what happens with this trend. I haven't used this enough times to know if the wine stains are truly gone from my teeth. But
did you try it?
Yeah,
Did you take a picture?
I should do that.
I think you need to post it. We want to see it.
I mean, well, now I've been using it in the shower now, so I'll have to, because you get this black powder all over your sink, and then you get, when you spit, then there's...
Does it come off easy?
Yeah, but I mean, you kind of have to scrub down your sink. It's like a whole thing. It's a whole deal.
Is your sink whiter?
That's a good point. Maybe my sink will be whiter over time. I'm just like, I need a washcloth. Anyway, it's sort of interesting. I'm sure this fad will disappear.
Maybe it's not a fad.
Maybe knows?
It works.
Who knows?
I saw a little infomercial for it, and I was really curious about it. I'm like, how can something that makes your teeth completely black actually be whitening it? So,
all right,
Catherine's going to be the test subject.
Okay, I will take a picture of my black teeth, and I will put it on Instagram. Connie, did you bring a dessert item to share with us?
I did. It's something that actually just came to our office today, and it's fascinating to me. We received a sample of a book from Princeton Architectural Press, and it is a, 6x6 beautiful black and white book all about coffee lids.
Ooh.
The plastic coffee lids that you get on to-go containers. Hundreds and hundreds of pages and pictures of coffee lids. And at first I'm like, who would write a book about coffee lids?
I'm sorry.
But then, it's a beautiful book.
It really is.
And at first I was like, oh, you have got to be kidding me. But then I stopped and looked at it, and it just reminded me how much coffee touches so many lives in the world. Not just people in the coffee industry, but the people that wrote this book are two architects. And one of them says he can't even drink coffee. So it's curious, it's really amazing to me to see how impactful coffee is around the world. And, there's books about coffee lids.
It was an ingenious design. Whoever designed the first coffee lid was brilliant. Before that, everyone must have been spilling their coffee all the time.
That's a very, very, very good sentiment there.
Or staying seated to drink their coffee, not actually walking, driving, doing all the other things we do nowadays when we drink coffee.
Yeah, lids are very important.
Well, I can't wait to look at that book. Thank you, Connie. Ken, what did you bring for dessert?
Well, I have two that I want to say. And one goes back to something you said earlier, which is that you like your coffee with cream and sugar.
I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry. You can like things however you like them. That's not a problem. What I would suggest, and which changed my experience with coffee many years ago, was when I first had a natural processed coffee. I didn't know that coffee could taste the way that coffee tasted. And I really encourage the listeners out there to go and go to your favorite local cafe that has more than one coffee available and ask for something with a different flavor profile than you're normally used to. And just give it a try and see what you like. There are a lot of different flavors of coffee out there, or types of coffee out there. We live in the single best time to ever be alive to drink coffee. We've never had access to the kind of coffees we have right now, and we don't know how long it's going to last. So get out there and try something different and try a process that sounds interesting and see what it tastes like. The other thing, the thing I really want to say for my dessert right now is here in Portland, Oregon, I drink IPAs all the time. And right now, it's a great time to drink winter ales instead. I've really enjoyed the different winter ales I've been having.
Yeah.
January, February is a great time for winter ales. And I like to step back from all the hoppiness of the IPAs in the winter. I love an IPA, but it's nice to mix it up.
Sounds delicious after all this coffee.
Yeah.
Jordan, did you bring us some dessert?
I had this experience back now a couple of years ago. I got to interview this guy down in San Francisco named Peter Luong, who is the founder and does all the sourcing for a company down there called Song Tea. And I did this interview with him because I had sort of noticed that a bunch of these good cafes were serving Song Tea, and I'd sort of hit on it as this interesting thing. It's sort of hard to know just from an eye test what is or isn't a good cafe these days. And I think it used to be a little bit easier, but Song is really picky about who they works with for wholesale, and so they've sort of become this way of saying, well, if they serve Song Tea, they probably really care about everything they serve. At the time, I didn't really know that much about tea, and I still don't, but I wasn't drinking a ton of tea. I was more just sort of interested in it as a story, but I've gotten down the rabbit hole now of like, I am just drinking tea constantly. And Song Tea, they make a couple of different things that are just amazing. Some of the most beautiful oolong teas. They have this oolong that they call Mr. and Mrs. Chen's oolong. That's from Nantou County in Taiwan. And they have a couple of different things that are from mainland China as well that are just wonderful and amazing.
Terrific wine shop.
Cool.
I like almost brought stuff to make people tea here, and then I was like, no, that's weird. Like, just it's okay.
We'll have to do a tea episode.
You should have him on your show. He's going to come. I think he'll be here next month. So.
Good idea. Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Jordan Michelman of Sprudge. Thank you, Ken Olson of Barista Magazine.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Connie Blumhardt of Roast Magazine and Daily Coffee News. I really appreciate all you coming in here. You're such nationally recognized experts, and I'm so lucky that you're all here in Portland. We're going to have to do this again sometime soon.
Sure.
Today's episode was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, in the studios of OPB. You can read all about us on the OPB website. Our editor is Alex Ward. Special thanks to OPB sound supervisor Stephen Cray, and our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. If you like our James Beard Award-winning show, please help us out. Rate us on iTunes, subscribe to The Four Top on your favorite podcast app, and please tell your friends about us. You can tweet us at @4top, all one word, or visit our Facebook page and post your thoughts about the show. We would love to hear from you. Bye-bye.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
Even though as a consumer, it's less my cup of, not tea, cup of
Cup of coffee.
cup of coffee. Yeah, yeah.